books that many of you may have seen before, but this is the 50th anniversary booklet for Sister Bay, and then this is the 100th anniversary booklet for Sister Bay. And those are over on the table, and I mention them in particular because in these books, Jungwirth Hardware is nicely featured in them. So take a look at that. You might want to take one of these along. And tonight, as a special, this book, which ordinarily sells for $15, is going for $10. So you might want to take a look.
Don't know about it right now.
All right. So with that, let's get to our program. And I'm going to introduce in a minute the Jungwirth family members who are presenting. So that's going to be Mary Jo Jungwirth Anderson, Carol Jungwirth Anderson, daughters of the founders, and Roger Jungwirth, grandson of the founders, who is going to talk about his role in that story. And along with the three of them, as many of you have already seen, we have other family members here tonight, so thank you for coming, as well as many of us who have been patrons of Jungwirth over the years. I'm going to put up a picture here. So here are the founders. Mary Jo and Carol and Roger, of course, are going to talk about this in detail, but I just wanted to say a couple of words about these people who started their first hardware business in a store where Spot and Space is now located in 1937. And Mary Jo and Carol Roger, I was looking at this earlier and matching up the dates. So Winnie and Joe, at the time they started that first store, they had just been married in 1935, and they were 23 and 22 years old when they started that first hardware store. That in itself is an interesting story, and Carol will tell you more about how Joe got his start in the hardware business. So Joe's grandfather, just a tiny little bit of ancestry here. Joe's grandfather came from Austria in 1881 and had a farm on Old Stage. And Winnie's grandfather he was a Carlson, came from Sweden in 1869. So that's their various ancestry. Now Joe's mother, and again, I don't want to steal the story here, but just one tidbit. Joe's mother was Mary Kessel. So if you connect the dots here, Marie Kessel was one of 13 children of Ed and Mary Kessel. And we are sitting in the barn of Ed and Mary Kessel today. So it's a nice little connection between the Jungwirth family and the Kessel family. And there are many other connections that you're going to hear about in just a minute. So this is a great story. It's full of connections to other families in Sister Bay. And I think importantly, the thread that runs through all of the stories that we have here about families and businesses in Sister Bay, the common thread is the service of these people to the community. And I think you're going to hear about that, and you know about that with respect to this family as well. So with that, let me introduce then Mary Jo Jungwirth Anderson.
I'm just going to start out with a couple of survey questions before my sister gives the intro to the history. So this is the Kessel Barn. So I wanted to know who all has ties to the Kessels. If you'd raise your hand. Just you, Annie? Well, of course, Ron, too. Okay. Well, absolutely we do. Right. Oh, and of course, Debbie. I've never been real into history all that well, so doing this presentation and having to dig up information, it's just interesting kind of what you find out about yourself. This barn, Uncle Ed, belonged to my Uncle Ed, who is Ann's uncle. Okay, because my dad's mother, who died very young, and Uncle Tony were really brothers. And this barn is a place where I milked my very first and last cow in my life. So I have fond memories. And then, because I'm nervous, I'm trying to think what the second question was. I really do appreciate everybody who has turned out tonight. And there are people that have touched our lives, our families' lives in different ways, and I have lots of classmates here, and that's special. How many of you knew my parents? Okay, because I saw a couple of people come in that I didn't know, and I think it's really interesting and cool that you're here to hear the history. So, I think that's all I have to say, so my sister is going to give you an intro to the very beginning. And this is my sister Carol Jungwirth Anderson. We both married Andersons, not related. Oh, now I remember, hold on, I remember the second thing. Famous for, okay, I have ties to the Kessel barn, but I also have ties to the Anderson Little Sister barn, because my husband grew up, his grandfather started Little Sister Resort. So there's ties, and he feels it is still his barn. So. I'm not very good at this.
That's okay.
I'm going to start back when the family left Austria, which was Bohemia at the time. Family of 9. Then we came to Oshkosh, and most of them, quite a few of them, scattered out to the Dakota Territory. Well, Joe Young, there are a million Joe Youngwirths in this family. History. Joseph Sr. that came over, one of the children waited because his wife was pregnant and a year to come, and she stayed with her family in Hungary. It took him 8 years when he came over to raise the $100 to bring his wife and son over. With all this talk about immigration today, I thought I'd mention that. And that was in 1877 when they went to Oshkosh. Joe Jr., one of 7, married Marie Hammersmith and moved to Door County. And the rest, as I said, went to Dakota. And out of those 7 children, Grandpa was actually born in Sister Bay, James, in 1884. It was one of 7. His sister Mary married a Spence, and I believe there's a Spence living in Elson Bay today now. 2 became nuns, 2 deceased the first year, and Uncle Louis lived just down the road from the Jungwirth homestead, which is out near Going Garbage. When James married Mary Kessel, she died in childbirth with her first child 2 days later. So Grandma Kessel raised him from the time he was a baby, and he was about 2 years younger than Uncle Tony. And you can imagine if you would try to separate your children, when Grandpa Jungwirth tried to bring him back home, he raised such a stink, they left him with Grandma Kessel. Which in over years in time, he told me his record cherry picking for extra money was 112 pails. He had also told me when he got out of school, he would hope to be a school teacher at one time. That obviously changed. His 4 half-sisters that Grandpa remarried. 2 were married Schmegel brothers from Institute. 1 married a Johnson from elsewhere and lived elsewhere. And then 1 sister did not marry. My grandma lived on top of the hill, a little cottage right where the building stands there, the original building. That building had burned when my dad was about 7 years old, he said, and it burned all the Christmas presents. But she lived in a little cottage there for years, and my dad visited her every Sunday, even when she was more or less terminal, not know quite how long it was. Aunt Hattie, his aunt, we've been raised with as a sister, took Grandma in, and my dad visited her almost every Sunday there also. That was Hattie Bertle at that time. The Bertles from down at the station. Then he worked in Campanaga for a little while, and that is how Hattie and George Bertle met.
Carol, I don't think a lot of people know
Can you
what
hear me?
Campanaga was.
Campanaga was the girls' camp in Peninsula State Park, started by 2 sisters from St. Louis, and it was mainly for wealthy St. Louis children. And so many of them, like the Schomels and the Goulds and all of those, their grandchildren are living here. But originally that's what Campanaga was for. They used to have a great horse show there too in the park. Ted Corneola had the riding stable on the corner of A in the park Middle Road, provided the horses back in that day. And then he worked after school a lot. I think I heard it was 14 at John Paul's hardware store. And
Let me bring it up a little bit for you, Carol.
I'm a shorty. I lost 6 inches in height. He worked for John Paul after school and working and for a number of years. And then he opened his own hardware store. I got to go with him when they sold off the merchandise in there. And I still have the cow hobbles I took home as a kid back then. And I probably thought they were horse hobbles. Anyway, he moved that building eventually to where the creamery is. My grandpa Carlson lived, the spot site had a small apartment, really, huge dining room. And my grandpa Carlson lived with us for a short time. Liked to take his false teeth and scare the death out of him. And he died, he made a special room at the new hardware store for him, but he died just before the building was completed. And Dad made it his upstairs office.
Carol, shall I show the first store? Shall I show a picture of the first store? Would that be a good time?
Yep, the first, yeah. My dad never believed in being open on Sundays, and I don't ever recall that he did. But there were an awful lot of Sundays there were a knock on the door, and somebody wanted something on a Sunday. He never turned anybody down. And from the time I was small, and this is at the Spots, the old store, Walter Collins worked for him. He was married to a Kessel. Anyway, I don't think there was an appliance or anything installed or gas delivered anywhere in the northern end of Door County that Walter didn't work on. And then Oscar Johnson was also there with him. I called Walter my second dad because he was the one that had fixed put the swings up and damaged his leg at the same time. He also fixed all the toys and things. And he was just, never got frazzled. We ate out a lot back then when we were at the new store because freight night, they don't pack freights till 10:30 at night. I think Mother probably packed most while Dad was doing paperwork a lot. But I never saw my brother, David, eat anything but hamburger, french fries, and a milkshake when we went out to eat. And that was popular Johnny D's back then. Sometimes my dad would take us over to Husby's, which had the fantastic cook, Clara Waller, and Mrs. Husby was in a wheelchair at that time. And they had great black cows that used to be, I don't know if it's still there on the front windows of Husby's, but when we were in high school, that's where we assembled to get on the bus. But growing up, even until that time, she would charge no more than a nickel for an ice cream cone because she didn't think kids should have to pay more. And 10 cents, I think, for a double. And while we unpacked the crate down there, I happened to pick the cornet in high school. I was tabooed from any time that they were working down there practicing my instrument. It probably shows you how bad I played it. And then I learned to type in grade school. I must have been fascinated with typewriters. So when I got to be 14, well, actually before that, I typed for my grade school teacher, who at the time was Wilson Wickman from Elson Bay, who became state superintendent of schools later. Had me typing even his papers just to keep me busy, I think. And then I started typing stuff for Dad. In those days, none of the businesses had to pay. The letters were sent out to like 30 people at that time. They did not have to pay till July 25th, when the money started coming in from the summer season. And you can tell the difference in the amount of businesses pretty well. That was the businesses in the northern end at the time. And I started, in the old days, you had a sales slip, handwritten sales slip. Those were filed in a big book, duplicate book, and mailed out at the end of the month. So that would have to be done every day. As learning in there, I went in and did all the catalogs, even when the ACE one came, they sent 1 million pages a month. And just dusting mostly, but working there. And then Mary Jo is quite a bit younger than I am. So in the afternoons, I would take her to the beach. That was my paid work. And back in that time, Sister Day was a 2-room school. 1 through 4 in the little room, they called it. 5 through 8 in the big room. And I think we learned well from watching others older, I always thought. And my mother we always had a yearly picnic at the Sister Day School, and my mother made lemonade from scratch in big metal milk cans, the high kind like that, and put the rinds and everything in there, and I, to this day, never drank. Lemonade is good. Everybody went to the school picnic after school was up. But what everybody really enjoyed when we were kids was the fact that the Fall Festival Carnival came to town. Every Wednesday and Thursday you were staggering, waiting, just listening with your ears as the carnival come in. Right where chop stands in the door was a big field. For a while, there used to be a little Shell station on the corner, I think. But that's where they had the carnival, tilt-a-whirl, everything. It was Nevertons from O'Connell Falls, and they licensed by the quarter, and it was a stretch for them because we were the only late quarter people. And they always informed me that I had a collie named Flash, and I hardware store had a little blonde there yet. He would be barking, waiting for them. They knew they were in Sister Bay when they saw my collie. And then I wanted to tell you my favorite Fall Festival entry. That's a lot of years because I was around for the first Fall Festival. It was Robbie Cadanco, who was Jay Cadanco's brother. He's in that hunting picture. He had an old truck with a flatbed. He put a outdoor toilet on it, and he sat in it with the door open in long red long johns. And my second favorite was the year they decided to have a pair of shoes. And it was to land between the bowl and Lisby's on the slope. It did, right on the mark, but it took the TV lead from the coal off, which was our gift shop at the old hardware store. But they used a helicopter from Fall Festival rides, which I love those rides. And they got a bonus on that. That's why the town could afford it. Because of the helicopter that checked public lines once a year in the county for, I don't know if it was public service or who. And other than that, I mentioned that my dad was also president of the Open Cast Association. And years after this, he and four partners, Gerhard from Algoma was the only name I could remember, and built a plant in Denmark, and he actually brought the annual LP Gas convention to the Alpine one year, and when he was president of it. And my dad also made the best homemade fish in his own personal cast iron pans, from skinning them, flaying them to cooking them. He was the best. And he also loved to hunt. But the last trip he went, he finally got a Kodiak license on Kodiak Island in Alaska. And that was, I think, his end dream. And he was on a plane, and I'm not sure why he was with Bill Kerr, the county game warden at the time. And Emma Tuft was also on the plane. But in the time that he was in flight, Anchorage had an earthquake. And they had trouble landing. And he never got on another plane. And that is all I have to say. The rest are doing the nuts and bolts of the businesses itself.
She stole some of my ideas, so I'm going to try to just touch on a few of the historical things and then go into the more fun stuff. And then Roger can get more serious again. So she touched when they got over to the new store on the corner in Sister Bay there. And that's where I grew up. They moved over there in 1948. And there's a little history on the building. That location had once been an implement and blacksmith shop back in the early 1900s. And Terry, who helped with this presentation from the Historical Society, knew more history than we knew, so he's good. And then it became a garage from 1933 until 1946. And that lot had been purchased from Leonard Swenson, which was a well-known name in Sister Bay. So they built this and opened up in 1948. And like Carol, you said in the other one there were living quarters, but in this new store there were quite large living quarters upstairs. That's where I grew up. And we had the grass area in front of the store for a while. And when fishermen would come to show their fish to my dad, their large catch of the day, they would take a good-sized ice chest, put it outside on those steps, and the public would stop by. It was kind of a big deal. And my dad was quite a fisherman. He had the state record for smallmouth bass, I believe, for over 35 years. But 2 state records. Second what?
Second state.
He was first. He had the record.
Short, but anyway, yeah.
Well, he's the historian. He should know. Which was a big deal. And he took me fishing one time down at Mink River, and I was probably 10, 12 years old. I had my Ben Casey sweatshirt on for that special occasion, and I caught a northern pike, a good size one. And most people, when they catch their fish, they, fillet them, cut them up, whatever. Well, I couldn't bear to be parted with my first large fish, so that fish lived in the huge minnow tank back behind the hardware store for the whole summer. That's how patient the man was. But before I forget to mention, because we're talking about Dad quite a bit, that business was both my folks, Mom and Dad. Mom did all the bookwork. She knew all the ins and outs. She was so good at people's names. She filled out fishing licenses. You name it, she did it. And it was the same with my brother David and his wife. Priscilla did all the bookwork and so forth. It was just very much a family-run business. I'm just going to touch that when I finally became around 14. It wasn't a question of, would you like to work in the hardware store? It was just sort of, you're working in the hardware store in the summers. And I was used to going to the beach. So to me, that was boring because I had to be there at 9 in the morning. And I did lots of dusting. But it was interesting because you had to learn people's names. You had to learn to make change. You ran the cash register. I was taught that if I was going out of the hardware store and somebody else was there, I either opened the door for them or so forth, because you were taught manners growing up there. Does anybody remember in the beginning of the hardware store that there used to be a display thing towards the back, and it had like a mini either kitchen or bathroom, so they could show, the stoves or sinks or whatever that they sold? Toilets. Well, I remember the toilets, yeah. Because they quit doing that once the toilets started to be used, and they weren't hooked up. They weren't hooked up for that. But I know they had the tub there also, and I used to take my naps there. Anyway, just a tidbit. So shortly after my folks opened the store here, Dad had purchased the hardware store building that he started to work in that had been on the other end of Bunda's department store, which is now on deck. And the Pauls lived in the building where Karen and Jean lived for many years, one of my classmates. And so they took that building and they moved it down to where the creamery is today. And for 10 years, Bunda's department store had their menswear there. And Gentry Burris, and I know a lot of you know Dick Burris, that was his dad. And so that was there for 10 years until I believe they added on to Bunda's. And then they put that at the end towards Lure. The building was then rented in 1961 to a couple from Chicago, and they opened a pizza place. And about a year later, they hired someone to burn the business. So it was an arson thing. And of course, my dad was good friends, and he was a hunting buddy of the local sheriff, Baldy Breidenhagen. The person or persons who were hired to burn the place were caught at the bridge in Sturgeon Bay because he called Baldy. Baldy had the bridge up, and the cops stopped, and they had the oil cans in the back of the car. Because back then, for those of you that don't know, we only had one bridge in Sturgeon Bay. And Carol touched on how Dad got involved in the gas business, and Walter and Oscar were the main people who did anything with that. And they were just always there from when I grew up. I'd eat their lunch. I'd visit with them in the furnace room downstairs. they were just two men that were just such an integral part of our lives growing up. And after probably early 70s, I believe, that my folks were getting ready to retire, and the place that had burned, Combs Propane, was built. And then that's another story of how the business, the gas and the appliances continued on. And as we were chatting with Terry the other day, we were going, well, what all other businesses were at Combs Propane? Anybody know of any?
A bookstore.
Who? Bookstore? Who? That was next door in that little tiny building where Analog is. That was Salty Joe's, yeah. But we also came up, after Combs went out, Clark's Propane went in there. And we had Pastimes Books, and I don't know if anything else was there until the creamery came in. But as time goes on, you realize that so many places now change owners, and sometimes it's hard to remember who was at a particular place. So trying to write some of those things down. What? Pete was in Salty Joe's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Mary Jo?
And Mrs. Elliott was in there. Elbow room only.
You want to talk about that?
Oh, what do we have?
You've been there, what, 20 years?
When my folks went out of the store where Spot is right now, Hagedorn's, I believe they were the first ones to go in, weren't they, Carol?
Yes, but they were there, I thought, about 20 years.
20-some years, I believe, at least. Hagedorn's were in there, and he had a photography, and he had a really cute gift shop. And then, I don't remember, for some reason, a jewelry store being there. And then talk about how things turn around. My sister and I, my dad was going to sell the building in '71, and he offered it for us to rent to open a gift shop. So we turn around on our back at that building where my dad started his business. And over the years, it's just amazing. I was in the gift shop from '71 to '83, and a few years ago I had a garage sale in Sister Bay, and somebody comes walking into the garage sale and looks at me and says, "You're the girl that used to work at the Cove." And it had been at least 35 years since I had been out of there, and it's just mind-boggling how somebody could remember that, but they could remember what I sold them, because it became a family heirloom, which was cool. Huh?
You hadn't changed?
I haven't changed in 35 years, Terry. Darlene, not a word out of you. And then my sister continued on until 1996. And then it was unusual. There was a girl that had won in a baking contest. It was on TV. I mean, this isn't too long ago. And she opened her pie store in there, and she was only there like a year or two and was out. And then I think that's when Yenny took over for the Spot and Sip.
There was a t-shirt shop there for a while.
Yes.
Besides the one we had? I don't think so.
No? It was,
I've always kept my eye on that building. Maybe, I don't know. And?
The cookie lady was there,
Yes.
who now owns Analog. She rented there.
No, not
Wow.
not the same person. Not the same person.
It wasn't the same person.
Rachel is up on the other end of Contact. Yeah. Where,
Oh, where Cranes is?
Yeah, where Cranes
Cranes is now?
Yes.
On the other side.
She also moved to,
Oh, was she in there just like briefly?
yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
I don't remember that. I'm not gonna argue, Danny, she's my cousin, what do I say? Okay, now where was I? Well, a big deal was that in '53, our parents became part of the Ace Corporation. And they were the 167th store in the United States to become an Ace. And now there are over 5,500 independently owned stores in the US. I can remember when Mom and I would go with Dad to a convention, we'd go shopping while he was at the convention. But if we ran into someone, like at dinner that night, I can remember a man coming up to my dad saying, "Joe, Ace number 167. I'm Harold from Ace 1002 or whatever." I mean, it's just, there's a thing with those numbers. And a year after, and I didn't realize it was only a year after until researching, my mom and dad, along with Perry and Connie Anderson from Sturgeon Bay, wonderful couple, opened Ace Hardware number 179, and it was on the corner, I think it's where Door County Eye Associates is now. And the cool thing about that building is, I think it used to be a drugstore. Roger? Was it? Nope. Whatever. They had old, that's true, it was before your time. They had old wooden flooring, and when you walked in there, you know, you heard your footsteps, and they had like 2 or 3 steps down into a basement area, and it was all toys.
That I can verify.
Yes. And they sold in 75. And Connie was the bookkeeper at that store, just as my mom was in Sister Bay. But over the years, and some people might know this, you probably have seen her name. She was quite the rose-mallist person. She was very Norwegian and had very great pride in doing rose malling. And I've got a couple pieces of my mom's stuff from her. Nyla?
If you know the Door County Historical Museum in Sturgeon Bay, in our athlete booth upstairs, Connie's Una is there. Constant.
Oh, okay. Oh, sweet. Oh, okay. So there is a display thing of Connie's uniform and so forth that she was known for wearing at the museum at Sturgeon Bay. Because rose malling to me is quite the art. We were just over on Washington Island and experienced the wonderfulness of those Washington Island people at a, what was that they had that day, an international food festival. And there was a lot of rose malling there and a lot of good food. So around 72, my folks then decided it was getting time to retire. And that is when my brother and his wife took over the business. And so now it is time for Roger, David and Priscilla's son, to come up and say hello.
Roger and Mary Jo, before we do that, can I just show a couple of the hunting and fishing pictures?
Oh, yes.
have the caribou in my workshop right now, the one on the right.
Okay.
That's where I saw it.
And there's before Roger goes up, I used to go down every night to say goodnight to my dad if he was working on hookwork, and I would always say goodnight to the moose.
That moose has been petted and kissed by thousands of
I'll
kids.
bet it has.
Yeah, it looks like
I don't think the one at Earl's is there, but isn't the one over at Biscuits? Caribou?
Yes,
Yeah.
Caribou is?
I
Yeah.
think it's still there.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yep. Yeah.
We had that Marlin, but one of the, I think it was the Jungwirth boys, broke the nose off of that. So we just decided that was enough of this.
I don't recall that.
That's probably why you don't recall it, because it might have been someone else. We did, Mary Jo and I caught, in a little inflatable, we caught a little Well, it was at that time, it was a big
It was big, yeah.
smallmouth, and Roger mounted that for
Yeah.
me, and he did an excellent job on that.
5 pounds.
Now they're getting, what, 6 and 7 and whatever. Back then, that was a big fish, right up in front of our place.
Okay. My dad, Dave, and my mom, Priscilla, took over this hardware store in 1976. In 74, my parents, my brother, and I moved into the apartment above the store. And like I said, in 76, my parents bought the store. I was 10 in 76, so my recollections of the 70s hardware store was kind of limited, other than messing around in there. For many years, there was a front checkout at the store. It was primarily occupied by my grandmother and my mom. It acted as a checkout counter, the billing department, which it continued to be the billing department till like 2000. The fishing and hunting license counter, and during the holidays and all year, the gift wrapping station. Years ago, my dad started an impromptu happy hour after the store closed on Fridays. It began as a few employees, sometimes a few friends, would stop by, and years later would become known as choir practice. The story goes that Harv Humke, who worked at the store, stayed after work for one and called his wife to let her know where he was. And he told her he was at choir practice. So the story goes. 1999 was a difficult year for the family and the store. My grandmother passed away in the spring, and in September my dad passed away unexpectedly. My mom, myself, and the store gang kept the store running as usual, despite obviously extremely trying times. In 2002, my mom sold the store to me. The early 2000s saw many changes to the store. We, first off, enclosed the front of the store. As most of you know, it was all windows back then, and we closed it in both for heating purposes and because a lot of the neighborhood, somebody's used to like to shoot their pellet guns, and it was not the best for the glass. So we went to a more conventional wall with windows and a door. The back of the store was converted from storage space to retail space. And we also added a computer system to track inventory and simplified the checkout and billing process, which my mom was very happy for because she didn't have to sit and copy down every house account bill every month. It was very difficult teaching old dogs new tricks, but we would end up adjusting to the new computer, and the changes were excellent. We also changed the complete layout of the store to what it basically is today. And at that time, we did away with the front counter because we just weren't seeing customers coming to it anymore. But it was kind of the end of an era. At the end of the 23, this past year, an opportunity arose for me to sell the store, and the timing and situation was right. And as of December 31st, this past year, the store was sold. That's my short but sweet story.
So when I was out in Arizona last winter, when you sold it, I had been given a key for the hardware store for all the years that David had it. And when Roger had it, he came with another key and said, and then if you change locks, I got a new key. So I'm sitting out in Arizona with the key to the hardware store wondering, how am I going to approach Amy with this? So I walk in one day and she has no clue who I am, and I said, would you like your key to the hardware store back? She didn't know until the next time I walked in, because she said, I didn't know who you were.
Amy from Door County Hardware Purchase.
Yeah.
And the new store number is 18655. It's a much larger number now.
Yes, we lost the old.
What's the number? 18655.
They don't base them on the same, they used to be based on as you joined ACE, the number went up one. Now they have a different system.
Can I say one thing?
Mhm.
I'm so very happy that it passed to a family that had been in the hardware business so long. And so close to where the ace was in Sturgeon. And then it's a daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been in business too. I always tease Amy from Door County because we were in business since 1937. And one time she advertised that they were Door County's oldest hardware store since 1939. And I didn't let that slide.
Any other questions for the Jungwirth family?
Can I just make a comment? When I was going through stuff and coming across old newspapers or whatever, about 15, I'm guessing this is 15, 20 years ago, Keita Steves, if some of you remember Keita. She used to be famous for her best dressed and worst dressed lists or cutest couples in North County. But she was a good writer. And she did an interview with Earl Willems and Clyde Casperson. And so this is 15, 20 years ago, and these gentlemen are talking about what people are talking about now, how things are changing. And to me, it was just one of the coolest articles. They're talking about their fellow business people. But like at the end, he said, you couldn't have picked a better place to raise your family, make lasting friends, and live as closely as possible by the golden rule. And I just thought it was a really cool article.
So I realized that we missed a picture, an important picture.
No, it's up there.
Oh,
There we go.
So, Mary Jo, you want to try and help piece together who's who in this picture?
Okay, we know who everybody, well, that's my sister that just talked, who's in the middle on the front row. The Stencils had a painting business in Fish Creek, and their son-in-law or whatever has Alexander's. And this is Verda Seiler. I would come to watch bowling on Friday night just to see her fingernails and the color polish she put on. And that is Jean and Greg Sundstrom's, Fuzzy Sundstrom's aunt. And then this was Ruth Larson from Ephraim. Eleanor Maas lived in Sturgeon Bay. Eleanor used to do articles in the Advocate. And this one we're not sure about. Does anybody know who she is?
Her name? Or
It says Margaret. Somebody thought it was Margaret Farmer. You think so? Really? Okay. Dr. Farmer's wife. However, I believe this lady would sometimes substitute bowl for the hardware store. Plessy Kramer from over at the Patio Drive-In in Sister Bay, and they had the horse corral there also, which was well known. But Plessy bowled one night, and she really just had such force, and that ball crossed the lanes. And all we could do was just laugh all night long. And her daughter's here, so I just thought she should hear the story. I don't know if you ever knew that.
I can tell you one thing, she used to keep the records for the bowling league, and then she used those books as her payroll books for employees.
No kidding. Crazy. Anybody have questions or anything?
We have one other.
Oh, we do,
picture.
I'm sorry.
So you've got this over on the table.
Yeah.
Maybe we talk about this picture as well.
Well, Dad again was a hunter, And this picture came about because, where's the sheriff on here? It's totally reversed backwards. It's the same picture. It's crazy, yeah. My sister thinks this was taken in Pembine, but Baldy Bridenhagen,
It's in front of the garage by the store. Before it was stuck with like 1950.
Well, they got him up, they got him up in Pembine.
Wasn't that the first year?
well, anyway, where's it going with that? Okay, so we've got, and we'll do a quiz here. We've got Baldy Bridenhagen, who was our sheriff for a long, long time. His son, well, he has more than one, but the most famous one is in Ephraim, Fred, and he, quite an artist. But Fred is the one who came up. Well, whatever. Yeah. Everybody's family has stuff like that. Then next to it is. Anybody recognize that? Yeah, it's exactly reversed. Okay, so. This guy was known as Dead-Eye Bergwin, Leonard Bergwin, okay? And then that's my dad, Joe Jungwirth. Robbie Kadanko. He was just such a character, and if he would pull into the back of the hardware store, our colleague would go absolutely nuts. He could not handle Robbie's laugh for some reason. Then we have Tony Kessel, Annie's dad, who my dad grew up with. And this is, I don't want to say the wrong name. Yep, Roy Redestrom. And Lawrence Weberg from Elson Bay. Giles Anderson from Sister Bay. Howard Olson. And my sister's old boyfriend, Butch Frost.
And does anybody remember when that hunt was? It was always on January 1st, and they would, isn't this the right one, Roger? January 1st hunt? It wasn't during deer season, it was January 1st.
They changed all the rules during.
They changed the rules and they didn't do it during.
They closed it for years.
And Baldy was our sheriff at the time, I believe.
Yeah.
And they'd all dress up in red and go hunting and hope that the DNR didn't catch them. They'd hang them up and it was too late to do anything.
Main Street. $10.
Any other questions or stories? Fuzzy, yeah.
Yeah, I think we just need to give the Jungwirth family a big thank you, because growing up in a town with a hardware store was fantastic. You know, we grew up, you guys were great.
You know, Fuzzy, that leads right to our very last slide then, which is this one. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mary Jo and Carol and Roger. Great program. Thanks, everyone.